I'm here tonight with Dr. Seymour Stoll, a dear friend, and somebody I've known for many years, but not long ago it was revealed to me that Dr. Stoll has the largest collection of a particular genre of baseball cards, and we're going to be introduced to those baseball cards tonight, and it's a very exciting moment for me. And first of all, Dr. Stoll, Seymour, tell us a little bit about just the general description of what a baseball card is, when it began, and where one would get them and where one can get them today. Just a brief outline.
So actually, before there were even baseball cards, there was something called a tin type. And the tin types, which we'll show in a few minutes, preceded baseball cards. Tin types started in 1859. And then you could start in the early 1900s to get in cigarette packs and caramel packs, baseball cards, and some had gum in it, some had chocolate in it, some had cigarettes in it, just to bind up the packs so the cigarettes wouldn't break up. And it's just been going on and on and on for 150, 160 years.
You decided at some point, and you'll tell us a little bit about that you're going to focus on a particular genre, as I said, and that genre was Jewish baseball players.
Correct.
Anybody who was Jewish, or we're going to see even converts to Judaism, that any baseball card associated with Jews was going to be part of your collection. And you've got not only the largest collection, as far as I understand, but the only complete collection of
Correct.
Jewish baseball players on baseball cards anywhere in the world. Is that right?
That's correct. If a Jewish player played in even one game in the major leagues, he's included in the collection. We have every single player in this. It's not even the collection. It should be a historical archive, because it shows the evolution and the integration of the Jew in America and how they progressed from anti-Semitism to full acceptance today. And also it shows the evolution of the game of baseball, as we'll see with the change of the uniforms and the equipment and things of that nature.
Why did you start collecting Jewish baseball players, and when did you start collecting them?
I started collecting all of the Jewish baseball players. I was 14 years old, and I went to the drugstore, which sold baseball cards at the time. I bought a few packs of cards, and in one of the packs was Sandy Koufax. And here it is, Sandy Koufax, just to double check, 1965 Topps, card number 100. So I was really excited, because unless you lived in a cave in Los Angeles, everybody knew who Sandy Koufax was. So I ran to my father and I said, "Look, I have a Sandy Koufax card." He says, "Well, listen," he says, "you know, if you have Sandy Koufax, why don't you just try to get all the Jews who played Major League Baseball?" And I said, "Oh, this is going to be so easy. You know, how hard could it be? How many players could it possibly?" I figured it would take me a month, 2 months. I didn't realize it would end up taking me 45 years. So that's how everything started.
Remarkable. So Sandy Koufax, a Jewish player, tell us a little bit about him and tell us about this card.
Well, everybody in Los Angeles knew who Sandy Koufax was. He refused to play on Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And he was one of the greatest pitchers who ever lived. And we were privileged, being born and raised in Los Angeles, to see him pitch live in person in Dodger Stadium. So he has, from 1955, his rookie card, and this was his last card, 1965, and we'll show in a little bit all of his cards. And he was just an icon. He really made a difference for all of us yeshiva buchers that, you know, went to school, and it helped us against anti-Semitism, and that even the non-Jewish students from other schools, they respected Sandy Koufax too. So they said, well, if Sandy Koufax is Jewish, then you guys must be okay also. So instead of having fights, we all became friends and played with each other. So it made a difference, not just collection-wise, but it made a difference in our lives. So it was really something powerful.
Now, I saw you looking at the back of the card, and I see that there's information here on the back of the card.
Yes.
And obviously it's going to apply to many of the cards that we're going to see. Tell us a little bit about what information is on the back of the card and why it's relevant and why it's different on each card, etc.
A lot of the math teachers love it that kids collect baseball cards because you have to use math, and it involves how many games the player played, if they were a pitcher, how many wins they had, how many losses they had, how many innings pitched they had, strikeouts, their earned run average, and for a batter, how many home runs they had, how many runs batted in they had, all the statistics. And this, of course, like we said, was from 1965. The first time any of these statistics appeared on a baseball card was in 1910. It was in the T205 Gold Border Series. Some of the older cards didn't have any backs at all. They're called blank backs because it was just blank. So you just had a front but not the back.
I know that there's a very precious card that you have.
Yes.
That is the only other person to have it in their possession is King Charles III in Buckingham Palace. Would you like to show us that
Sure,
card?
I'd love to. So this is a tintype. This preceded any type of baseball card. There were no baseball cards yet. This preceded the baseball cards. This particular tintype is from 1867.
Wow.
It's from 2 years after the end of the American Civil War. And it's a complete tintype because you have a geometric thermoplastic casing, which in itself is worth thousands of dollars, the original hinges, and you open it up, and there you have Long Levi Meyerly, Levi Shmuel, I call him.
Levi Shmuel.
Levi Shmuel, in the gold leaf, in his 1867 uniform of his Philadelphia team.
Lovely velvet padding over here.
Exactly, and you can see the evolution of the game itself with his cap and his pants and his shoes. It looks like he's not even playing baseball, but this was the baseball uniform of 1867. And Pike, who was the very first Jew to ever play baseball, and so they were contemporaries.
Right.
And they were both named the top 5 players of the 19th century baseball. They were so good that 50 years after Lipman Pike passed away, and hardly anybody had seen him play, he was so good, he still got votes to get into the Hall of Fame in the inaugural class in 1939 in Cooperstown.
Wow.
And so,
and he also played in Philadelphia?
No, he played in Cincinnati and Hartford. In those days, you went from team to team. Generally, you re-signed with a different team every year.
I'm going to check it to see if it's a blank back. It's not quite a blank back. It's actually a postcard.
Correct.
But I'm training slowly about baseball card collections.
Yes, he was so fast, by the way. He went into a race with a horse to run around all the bases, and he beat the horse.
Really? Incredible.
So, yeah, he was unbelievable. He was a 5-tool player. Those are the greatest players that you can be. You can hit for power, run, field, and throw. So he had all the tools.
He had every skill that you needed.
Every skill that you need, and he was the very first professional baseball player. He was the first person to be paid
to play baseball.
$20 a week, which doesn't sound a lot.
Well,
but
in the 1860s.
The 1860s, 1870 was a lot of money.
Right.
A lot of these players faced a lot of anti-Semitism. I mean, they would be blackballed from playing.
Tell us a little bit about anti-Semitism in baseball.
Anti-Semitism was rampant in baseball in the early days, and a lot of the Jews knew that if it was ever found out that they were Jewish, they would never have a chance to play. They'd be blackballed out of the league. So a lot of the Jewish players changed their last names. A lot of the players, Harry Kane was Harry Cohen. Sammy Bone was Sammy Cohen. You had a million people whose name was Cohen, but they had to hide their name. There's a player, Phil Cooney. He played 1 game for the 1905 New York Highlanders. They were the precursors of the New York Yankees. Mm-hmm. So why are people paying thousands of dollars to get this card? And this is also from 1910. It's the Oback series. It's very
not
rare.
A blank back. I can
Not
see.
A blank back. This is the Oback series. Yeah. It's because Phil Cooney was really Phil Cohen.
Right.
So
He changed his name to sound more Irish.
Yes, exactly, because there were a lot of Irish players in those days, and they were obviously very well accepted and everything. So there were a lot of players, like we said, that refused, to show their identity. But the very first Cohen who admitted he was a Cohen was the first superstar in New York, Andy Cohen.
Wow. What year was he?
1927. Mm-hmm. And he was so good that John McGraw, the manager of the New York Giants, traded away Rogers Hornsby, who was the greatest second baseman in the history of baseball, so he could start Andy Cohen. And of course, he had a short but brilliant career. He slid into second base and fractured his ankle. And of course, in those days, medicine wasn't like it is today, and that pretty much ended his career. But he went into managing teams, and he had a long, long, long career managing. But he was the first superstar Jew who admitted, my name is Cohen, this player. His name was Harry Chosen. He was the greatest catcher that nobody has ever heard of. And the reason is he belonged to the Cincinnati Redlegs baseball team. They were so anti-Semitic, and they were open about it. The owners claimed that no Jew would ever play for their team, ever. And even though he was a fantastic player, they kept him in the minor leagues because they didn't want to bring him up to the, and they wouldn't trade him either because they didn't want him to play against them. So, I mean, just even to spite themselves. Anyway, one year he had such a phenomenal year. He won the Triple Crown in the minor leagues. He had the best batting. They couldn't keep him down. It would have been so blatant that even the worst anti-Semites said, you got to bring him up. So they said, fine, we'll bring him up to the major league team, but that doesn't mean he has to play. So in those days, they played 154 games in a season. Wow. For the 153 first games, he sat on the bench. He never got into a game. He couldn't get into a hotel because he was a dirty Jew. The bus driver wouldn't let him sleep on the bus because he was a Jew. He would go to a restaurant and nobody would serve him food because he had to sleep on the park bench, whatever. Well, anyway, a miracle happened. The very last game, game 154, he got into play and he got one hit. The season ended. They sent him down to the minor leagues, never to be heard from again.
Really?
So I read his story many, many years ago in a magazine, and I really felt badly. And I said, I wonder what happened to him. And through my contacts, 40, 50 years later, I got a hold of him. They gave me his phone number. He was living in New Orleans at the time. He was 86 years old. And I said, hi, I'm Seymour Stoll. I'm doing this historical archive of Jewish baseball players. Can you tell me what happened? He says, don't feel bad for me. It was meant to be. I met a beautiful woman. She became my wife. I had wonderful kids, grandkids. I have a great business. Everything was fine. But my family felt really bad about it. So obviously they never made a card of me because, I was just up for a cup of coffee. So they made a card. His own family made a card. It's called The Card That Never Was. They made a card of him in his Cincinnati uniform, which he signed, and they only gave them out to family members. He said, I admire what you're doing. He said, so I have one card left.
Wow.
Says, would you like it? I said, you bet I would. So 2 weeks later in the mail, the card came, and he signed it. And so that was the story of
amazing story.
Yeah,
what
an amazing story,
story.
What he had to endure. I don't really mean this to be funny because this umpire had to endure a lot. Of umpires, whether they're Jewish or not, always are, in bad shape. This guy's name was Steamboat Johnson. He was a Jewish umpire. Nobody knew he was Jewish until his deathbed. And how do I know this? Because, and the same thing, it applies to all of these other Jews that suffered discrimination. So what does it say? His mother was a German Jew, and on his deathbed, Johnson told the rabbi that he'd hidden his Jewish identity his entire life because he was afraid of anti-Semitic taunts during his umpiring career. He said, it's bad enough being an umpire, but to be a Jew too would have been really terrible. So this is what all of these people really, in a nutshell, had to endure. Elliot Maddox is the only black baseball player who ever played in the major leagues who converted to Judaism. And he played, fortunately, in New York, so there was a large Jewish population. And he was a pretty good player, too. There have been a couple Dominican players that converted to Judaism, but Elliot Maddox is the only black player up to today that converted to Judaism. Well, folder card, they only made it for 1 year, 1912. It's from Hassen Cigarettes, and you can see the 3 panels. And of course, one of the panels is our Yiddish curver friend, Barney Pelty. And on the back, you have and this is in mint condition, So here are 2, it doesn't even look like a baseball card, but these are 2 baseball cards. It's the T3 Series 1909, 2 different Jewish players. It's the Turkey Red series, cigarette series. And I love these because, you know, you'd never think you could put it on a wall and make it like a painting.
Yeah.
So what I like is sometimes people, they forget about the backs of the cards. So here's the front, same company, but look at the backs. One of the backs has the cigarette company itself, and the other one gives you the checklist of all of the baseball players that are in the series. So I love this. It's just the contrast it's amazing. 10 cigarettes for 10 cents. A penny a cigarette.
Wow.
What could you get today for? I remember when I was little, I could still get like 2 pieces of gum for a penny, something like that. This is a pennant, actually. They made this in the 1930s. It's called the B-Unk. The B-Unk series in the 1930s. And they would put a baseball player in a sort of like a baseball diamond with all of the bases and everything. And you could get this also as a premium. You couldn't get it, you know, just by buying. You had to buy a certain amount of packs, and then they would send that to you in the mail. So another very rare, and also, you know, you can see it's so thin it disintegrates very easily. This player actually was the son of an Orthodox rabbi in New York City.
Really?
Yeah, Mike Shimmer was his name. And he played for the New York Giants during the war years, 1945. Most of the players were gone. They were serving in the army. So he got his chance to play. But I love the back of this card. You're going to love this. It's Sunbeam Bread. So I wanted to end with Hank Greenberg, who, along with Sandy Koufax, is probably the greatest Jewish player who ever played. He played in the 1930s and 40s, and this is his 1938 Heads Up Gaudi series. Of course, you see his head is humongous there. And he also has cartoons around the card. There's a card of this without the cartoons and with the cartoons. With the cartoons is much more expensive. Right. But in any event, the reason that I wanted to show this card, in 1938, Hank Greenberg hit 58 home runs. Now, Babe Ruth held the record with 60 home runs. He hit that in 1927. And there were 7 games left in the year, so everybody figured he would break the record. But the pitchers didn't want a dirty Jew to break Babe Ruth's record, so the last 7 games of the year, they refused to give him anything good to hit. They'd either hit him or the pitch would be up here or down there to the side. So he ended at 58 home runs. Years later, when I was training in New York, I got to meet Ralph Kiner, who became a teammate in his last year of Hank Greenberg. And he was a really nice guy. He was a home run champion himself. So I said to him, "Hi, I'm Seymour Stoll. I'm doing this, you know, historical archive of baseball cards of Jews. And, you know, of course, I have Hank Greenberg, who was your teammate." I said, "But I have one question for you." He says, "You don't have to ask me. I know what you're going to ask me ahead of time." He says, "You're going to ask about the home run record with Babe Ruth, right?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Hank Greenberg always said publicly that, you know, that's just how it was. You know, he was very humble." I said, "What did he say to you in private?" He said, "In private, he told them they wouldn't give me anything. They didn't want a Jew to break the record." Wow. So yeah, that was the truth. But in any event, he was very, very good. Every time he hit a home run, he said, "I'm hitting this home run, it's like I'm hitting it against Hitler." And he had a lot to, even though he was a superstar, he played in Detroit. So Detroit, of course, Henry Ford was there, and he was no friend of the Jew. And Father Coughlin had the #1 radio station show in the United States. It was the #1 rated show, and he was a real virulent anti-Semite. So he had to fight a lot against anti-Semitism. He also refused to play on Rosh Hashanah. So there have been a lot of Hank Greenberg sightings in 50 different shuls in Detroit, but he definitely didn't play that Rosh Hashanah either.
Thank you so much.